Hi everyone, I'm Jose Rivera, the CEO of CSIA. Thank you for attending this month's CSIA webinar. Today's webinar is Strategic Planning is not an event, it is a continuous process. And it is presented by Anthony Valasek, Director of Organizational Development and Quality at Premier System Integrators. This webinar is part of our efforts at CSIA to promote and provide training around our best practices. In 2016, we're broadcasting monthly webinars on best practices. These webinars will be delivered by members whose companies have received our certification on multiple rounds, as is the case with Premier System Integrators who have completed 4 certification rounds. This webinar will focus on sections 1.1.1 through 1.1.3 of the Best Practices and Benchmarks Manual. Be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Questions will be answered during the webinar, so be sure to ask them. The webinar will be archived for later viewing, and the slides will be available also. This time, we are trying out an online polling. Please participate when you're asked to do so, and please have some patience with us. This is a new experiment. The host and sponsor of our monthly business topic webinar is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox understands that you're not just buying software licenses, but are investing in a supplier relationship. Software Toolbox has supported CSIA since 1997 and seen the CSIA best practices grow into the great tool they are today. In Software Toolbox best practices, recommendations is the advice to think carefully before writing custom code and only to do so when no other solution is available. Custom one-off applications are filled with risk and hidden costs when evaluated over the full system lifecycle. Software Toolbox highly configurable, off-the-shelf software products and support services are proven to lower system integration risk. This month, they are offering CSIA business owners a free white paper that discusses 10 trends for industrial decision support systems. This software application space that has historically been filled with custom applications or solutions built on spreadsheet spaghetti. In the client's automation journey, they are all over the place as it relates to automatic versus manual data collection, and most need a little of both. When reports are needed, users get trapped in the report factory waiting on someone else because they can meet their needs with self-service and resort back to Excel and custom code in multiple versions of the truth. The next generation of manufacturing leaders don't know our world without laptops and smartphones, and they expect self-service. At the end of the day, the client has operational and business decisions to make, and there are many users and need to move on to a more sophisticated yet affordable solution. This paper discusses 10 trends that are changing the landscape of industrial decision support systems and provides insights you can bring to your users and add value. Download the free paper at softwaretoolbox.com/CSIA June 2016. Now, I would like to introduce today's webinar presenter, Anthony Valasek. Tony is a Director of Organizational Development and Quality at Premier System Integrators, a CSIA certified member in the greater Nashville area. Tony holds a BS in Aerospace Engineering, an MBA and PhD in Business Administration. Tony is a certified project management professional by the Project Management Institute and a certified Myers-Briggs type indicator practitioner. Tony has held a successful career in product and solutions design and engineering management at renowned companies like Tyco Electronics, Osram Sylvania, Triumph Group, and now Premier System Integrators. So without any further delay, here is Tony.
Well, thank you, Jose, and thanks to CSIA for this event today, as well as sponsor Software Toolbox. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. And hopefully you can all see that screen. Is that okay? Just a quick check.
Looks good.
Okay. Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategic planning today. Hopefully you can pick up a few things, whether you've been doing this for a long time or are just getting started and looking into doing it for the first time. Obviously, we've been doing it for a little while here at Premier, and it's been a very helpful process, and we'd like to share some of that knowledge and some of the things that we've learned through the years that we've been doing it. So to start with, this certainly supports CSIA best practices and benchmarks, and just want to make sure that you're aware of that. If you're looking for that certification, this is a section, this is right at the beginning, 1.1 Strategic Management section. I'm going to be focusing a little bit deeper on 3 specific points today. The first one, 1.1.1, is basically talking about mission, vision statements, and strategic objectives. 1.1.2, documented business values. We'll talk about that a little bit, as well as 1.1.3, which is basically the objectives and KPIs that you may be using as you move forward with your organization. So here's your agenda. So what is strategic planning? What does that process look like? We're going to talk a little bit about mission and vision statements, strategic objectives, supporting goals, and then finally some lessons learned, our version of the hot stove, if you will, from if you were at the conference not too long ago. Let's start with what is strategic planning. And the key here is to remember that it is a process of determining the company's long-term goals and then identifying the best approach for achieving those goals. As I talk to some people think that strategic planning is an event, and it can certainly look like that on paper. And one of the key things that I'd like to have you remember is that it's a process. It's not something you can simply do at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year in preparation for the following year and then be done with it. If you do that, chances are you weren't successful. And if that's how you were planning on doing it, then you probably would not have enough time to actually get the benefits that you're hoping to get out of it. So do keep that in mind, that this is something that just keeps going on and on, year in, year out. One feeds into the other. So what do other people think? Well, I got some quotes here, some old quotes and some new quotes. And certainly some people can attest to this if that's their ilk. Others, a little fast there, but Benjamin Franklin, everybody's heard of him. So if you fail to prepare, you're preparing to fail. That's a good one. And then Sun Tzu, if you remember that, Art of War, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before the defeat. And then Louis Gerstner, some of you can remember him from IBM fame. In the large majority of companies, corporate planning tends to be an academic, ill-defined activity with little or no bottom line impact. So we're going to talk about some of those things and why it can work and it could fail depending on how you approach the issue. So let's talk about strategic planning process. Monica, was there any polling that happened there? Sorry.
Let me go ahead and start it, and I don't see the pages, Tony, so if you let me know for slide 8 and 9 would be great. So let me go ahead and open the poll here.
Okay. So as Jose said, we're trying something new today, so there's just a quick little question. Would appreciate, this could help a little bit of the discussion today. As we discussed, I'd like to know how many of you have even done something like this in the past, or are you doing it on a continuous basis? So while we're getting some feedback from there, let's talk a little bit about the strategic planning process. So on the left, you can see these are the steps that we at Premier go through, and I'll try to decode these for you, and if you have any questions, again, please type those in, and we'll get to them. But basically, we got external. We look at our internal state. We then take some time to study our capabilities and competencies. We go into assumptions, followed up by strategies and development of those strategies, goals and objectives of those strategies, followed up by action plans, budgets, and then, of course, schedules. Now, what does that look like? On the right, I tried to put this in a picture. What kind of questions are you asking about your company as you go through it? And first and foremost, as you're talking about the external, you're really saying, what does it look outside your four walls? What's going on in the market? And and those sorts of things. What does it look like on the inside? How does our business look right now and on the inside? So pretty, pros, cons, threats, a SWOT analysis, if you will. And then you go to, well, what do you do well? That's your capabilities, competencies, things like that. And those are very important because we'll get into strategic objectives are really high-level goals for the company. And if you don't focus on the competencies and the true capabilities of your company, then you're going to find yourself spending time in areas that don't have quite the impact that you wish they will. Or in some cases, if you set an incorrect strategic objective, it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And then what will happen to you? This is an interesting one. This is kind of, how are you going to shoot yourself, or how others are going to shoot you, if you will, in the marketplace. So you can get a little creative here, and I would expect that you would, but you're really trying to figure out what's going to happen to us as we go through this year. Now, this could be anything, from external threats, internal threats, things that or got a good percentage chance of what do you think is going to happen so that you can adjust for those. So they definitely play in to the things that you answered in the earlier questions that you asked yourself. And then once you kind of got that sort of analysis done, then you go to the next step and you're really trying to figure out, okay, now I got all this information, what am I going to do with it? And that's when you start forming your strategies and your objectives for the year or the 2 years or whatever time frame that you set this on. I wouldn't recommend more than 3 personally, just because they tend to lose a little bit of focus. And then after you've come up with your high-level goals, then you got to actually put some meat on the bones. What we call SMART goals around here is how and when are you going to do it? You got to have deadlines, and you got to have tactics, and you got to have champions, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into. And then, certainly a very important step, and something that I've seen companies fall on, is how do you do? Are you measuring it? Are you throughout the year? Are you holding people accountable? You have to ask yourself honestly. This is the brutal, honest facts kind of thing. If you're familiar with Jim Collins' work here, and how did you do? Did we meet our objective? Did we not meet our objective? Why did we fail? Why did we succeed? And sometimes it's a partial answer. We completed half of it or 3/4 of it. What happened? So you got to do that, and then with those answers, hopefully, then come into the next year or the following session, then you can start over and then hopefully adjust to make sure that your goals are better this year than last year. Again, pretty high-level stuff, but it is a process, and it does take some time. And I can see that the poll question came back, and it looks like the bulk of you do strategic planning, and that's good, but a fair number do not. So hopefully we'll get both sides of this. So when we start our strategic planning approach, you can see from the picture, these gentlemen are jumping out of the plane, and what does that signify? Well, once they jump out, that's it. There's no turning back. You could say they're fully committed, and this is a mental state, a mental approach. Strategic planning otherwise will be a academic approach, and then nobody's committed to it. So we go into it that, hey, we are definitely going to make decisions. And you set the tone, certainly as the leadership of the company and the people in that room with you, you get to tell them, hey, look, we're gonna do this. We're gonna beat the market. This is just simply, hey, we're using our objectives, right, which should flow out of our mission statement and our value statements and things of that nature. So, why would we go into fail? We're going to go in there and beat the market. This isn't just simply just a matter of beat the competition down the road. This is, we're going to do better than most others. And then we're going to stick to the plan. And this goes back to, if you don't really have a plan, if you come up with just a high-level statement that doesn't have any meat, then people aren't going to be able to follow it, and that's going to lead to your demise. So we want to make sure that, again, a mental state is, hey, we're going to make the decisions, we're going to beat the market, we're going to stick to the plan. And when things happen to us, this is the assumption side of things, we're going to adapt, we're going to change direction, we're going to improvise, but we're not going to get too far off course. We're going to be accountable. Now this one's a little bit tougher for some companies, but I promise you the more accountable people are, the more successful you're likely to be. Now again, accountable can go a lot of different ways. Doesn't mean you have to get the stick out, but at the same respect, it has to be very clear to the people that are championing any particular objective that they are accountable for this, and we expect to see results. And over-communicate. Now, I say that over-communicate sounds like too much, but it's really a state of mind in that, hey, we're not going to let things go without talking about them. So when you over-communicate, chances are you're probably communicating the right amount, unless somebody flat out tells you, hey, you're telling me too much, and that's pretty much not the case. If you think about the failures of businesses, failures that we've made here at Premier, here and there, a lot of times I can trace it back to communication, and it's mostly the lack thereof. And a lot of assumptions get made, things of that nature. So if you go into it with the mentality that you're going to over-communicate, chances are at the end of the day, again, you're going to probably communicate just the right amount, which puts us into an active state. This is not passive. This is not something that's going to happen to me. This is something that I'm going to take hold of, and we're going to accomplish that. Again, these are longer-term goals, and without this mindset, it just becomes very difficult. I believe this is another poll question, Monica, if you could throw that next one out there. So we're going to talk about mission statements and vision statements. First and foremost, it should be concise. Not real lengthy, not real wordy, not something that's going to take a long time to digest. It has to be pretty simple, pretty easy to grasp. Okay. You should be able to walk up to any employees infected. Challenges be your challenge question of the day. If when you get off this call and you're walking around and you're talking to, you can pick even some leaders within your company and ask them, you know, what is our mission statement? What is our vision statement? And you may be surprised at some of the answers that you get. Hopefully, most of them can be paraphrased. They should be able to hit the highlights. And but hopefully, you know, you get a good answer. But if you don't, it could be a little bit telling that it may not be simple enough. It may not be concise enough. It should also reflect your core beliefs. You should be able to find, you know, just an example, you should be able to see posters maybe across the company, or highlights on your company website, your internal site, or, you know, where is it in your company? Can you go and can you point to a couple places that people are getting reminded of your core beliefs as a company and value? And for most people, it's a show me, don't tell me kind of thing. So certainly as the leaders of the company, we got to be expected to live up to the mission and vision statement, and we should be driving towards that. If they don't see that, you know, they're not going to believe it, and then it's going to be hard for us to change that culture. Should be shared with everyone during onboarding. So you get new employees. This is an important thing. This is something I personally do with every one of our engineers as they start with the company. I sit down, I go through our mission statement, our vision statement, our values at Premier, and make sure that they've at least heard them day one, and then they should be able to see them as they walk around and things that as we get into our career development process here at Premier. So make sure everybody has seen it. We plastered on the walls. Make sure, and you know, really what I'm trying to say is just make sure that there's multiple ways to access this. It shouldn't be some cryptic thing hidden in a folder somewhere deep and buried on SharePoint or some other means. And then finally, let's not forget what a vision statement really is. It's a sight thing, and most people are visual learners. I think the number is like 70% or some high number. So basically, they got to be able to see it. If they can't picture it in their mind's eye, it probably needs some work. So take a look at your mission statement. Can you see your company doing those things in your mind's eye? You know, it's no different. It all starts here, the little picture here, and a little intro in your newsletter. Basically starts high up in the mountains. You know, not everybody can see it. Not everybody's climbing up there. It starts out as a little trickling stream, and it's going to gain strength and as it moves down into strategic planning. So let's go into strategic objectives. And Monica, I believe this is the last polling question. So for those of you that have strategic objectives and go through this process, you know, how well are you doing? And then when I say, you know, meet on time, let's see what you come up with. First and foremost, you got to ask yourself, are your objectives directly aligned to the organization mission? So this all feeds back to, if they don't know what the mission is, there's not as much of a chance, obviously, that your strategic objectives are going to be aligned to that. So they should be able to see this trickle-down effect throughout the organization. You know, that stream starts high in the mountain, starting to build some steam, it's gathering into the brooks and streams, it's flowing down towards the river. It should be high impact. Your objectives should be very high impact kind of things. These are things that might not be game changers for our organization, but they're going to keep us on the top. They're going to keep us moving forward in the right direction, and they're going to help us achieve, as you know, what we want this company to look like in 5, 10, 15 years. You know, these are the kinds of things that we need in place to make that happen. That's what we look at when it comes to strategic objectives. And it looks like the results a little mixed, because some folks that do really well, and a lot are about 50-50. Next, they're SMART, and if you're not familiar with that terminology, certainly you can look it up. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound is how we use that. And the reason we use that is we think it's a very good acronym for us. But again, people got to know what they are, and they got to be held accountable and measurable. And these are the kind of things that we use when we set any type of objective or goal, is this SMART acronym. And here's another thing. I don't know. I haven't really got a lot of people talk to me about this particular piece, but I believe that strategic objectives should be shared with everybody in the company. These are things to be locked away, put into the white tower, and only a select few get to see them. You know, when we come up with them, we broadcast them. We do them in our town halls, and then we give updates every quarter when we do our town halls with our employees. And again, we publish things in our newsletters and things like that internally. And but we make sure that everybody's aware of what is the leadership of this company doing this year to move the company forward into the future. What are those things? So I'd encourage you to do that if you're currently not. Assign an empowered champion. There should be one objective, one champion. Goes back to the old adage, if everybody's got it, nobody's got it. And that's one of the things that we've got to be very careful on, because a lot of times you'll have teams working on an objective, which makes sense if they're strategic objectives. Very few of them are done in a vacuum by one person. But they certainly need to be done with teams, but one person is the champion. One person's going to drive that. No different than your projects have project managers. Strategic objectives have champions, and everybody needs to have that person. One objective, one champion. And then limit this, and I can't stress this one enough, because and we'll get into some of the things that we've learned. But limit it. You don't have to have 10 to 15 objectives. If you have 10 to 15 objectives and are completing them all, I'm very interested. Hey, give me a call, because it's very difficult. And so we try to limit ours. 3 to 5 seems to be our sweet spot here, and it's worked pretty well over the years. When we get more, we get less done, because we got people scattered and then working on multiple things as it is. If they're trying to work on multiple objectives at the same time, much higher chance of failure. So we all want to be successful, obviously, and I see that one there as a limiter for some folks that are dealing with strategic objectives and company goals. You should review them at least monthly, sometimes even a little more. It just depends on the type of objective, how far out it is. Our minimum time frame is, a 6-month objective, but that's just what we do. Typically, they're 1 year to 2 years long for us, but at the same time, they should be a longer term item in general. So, but we do review those monthly, and if you're not looking at it, chances are sometimes it just doesn't get done as regularly. And last but certainly not least, don't compete for resources as it relates to strategic objectives. We all compete for resources when we're trying to determine our project teams. That's pretty natural. When it comes to strategic objectives, depends how big your leadership team is, with the president or the CEO or whatever. You can't do all of those things. They should not be the champion on those things. So, for at least not for all of them. So what you will find is, maybe one of your challenges is that you have a team of whatever it is, 3 to 5 to 10 people that come up with your objectives as you're working on them. And you find out that everybody's number one priorities aren't the same priorities. So what happens? Then you get into, who's the king of the hill? And then nobody wants to get into that situation. So be careful when you're setting up your objectives. They could all be very important. But they may not all be able to be done at the same time. So try to avoid the competing for resources. You may have on a team to complete an objective multiple people, but you do have to keep that in mind. And I've seen this one here is certainly one that has bitten us occasionally as it relates to completing a strategic objective, and I'm assuming that some other folks out there have had that issue as well. So we get through the objectives, we come up with our 3 to 5 big ideas that we need to move and how we're going to move the company, but then that trickles down. Right? We got our stream, started the mountains, going through the hills, and now it hits the river, and the river's full of boats, and we got to be careful about how we navigate those waters, but now you got more people involved. So the supporting goals are really the mini goals, if you will, or many things that you try to trickle up into your objectives. How am I going to meet this objective? It's just simply coming up with the plan. So we got to make sure they're aligned to strategic objectives, which in turn are aligned to the mission statement. Do keep in mind there's multiple goals, and that may exist for each strategic objective. You're just breaking it down. Some people use project. I've seen people use Excel. I've seen Word. I've seen a lot of different ways for people to kind of break down, do their WBS, if you will, or come up with a schedule. These two are smart. They have to be specific so people know exactly what they need to do. They're measurable. They're attainable. They can get done in the time frame that they were scheduled to be done in, and they're relevant as well as there's a due date time bound. Goals have owners, just like objectives have champions. And if owners have a lot of things, then sometimes those things don't get done, or none of them get done in some cases. So all the goals should have owners. If they don't have owners, those are probably the ones that aren't getting done. And this is, as it relates to this strategic planning, I want to point this out that, these owners here, the ones that are doing supporting goals, they could be project managers in some case. They may be mid-level management in your company. But they need to be able to understand the bigger picture, how this stuff flows up, and which means by default that they need to have a little more access than others. So when you're picking the owners, do keep in mind that they may need more access than they currently have, and if they don't have that, you either have to give them to them, or you may have to think about picking a different owner because, again, we're trying to be successful here. And this is one that you got to be a little careful of because I've seen this, we're trying to push down and give people opportunities and things like that. Well, they inevitably, don't have all the intel that you do as a leader of the company. You have everything at your disposal and they don't. So they need to be equipped basically, and it's your job, your charter is to equip to make sure that everybody can be successful as much as possible. And then like any other goal or objective, they got to be reviewed regularly. And then in this case, they're usually adjusted. If you're going to have adjustments, they should start with goals. If you're starting with adjustments on strategic objectives, you probably need to check why that was a strategic objective this year. So if you're making changes to goals, that's one thing. If you're making changes to objectives as the year's going on, not that you can't do that, but if you find yourself doing that, then you may want to readjust and think about the process by which you came up with that strategic objective, and you may find that it was either a little too aggressive or just was pointed in the wrong direction. Some other things happen. So again, not impossible, but again, we like to say that it changes, like your mission statement shouldn't change that regularly. Strategic objectives should change a lot less, and your goals may change regularly depending on the situation. So I got a final slide here, and I try to leave a lot of time for questions and answers here, but this is really the lessons learned. I might spend more time on this slide than anything, and I pulled up, if any Trekkies out there, the double face palm. So when you're sitting and doing strategic planning sessions, if you get this, if you're looking across your room and you're seeing this a lot, chances are you've either wore them out or they're completely clued out on what's going on. So just pay attention to the body language. I've seen this happen a few times, and we just have to adjust so that we're meeting the needs of the company. So first and foremost, one of the things that can go wrong, if you will, or that we've experienced here as well, is making sure you involve the right people. This should be key decision makers at times in strategic planning. It shouldn't just be anybody and everybody's invited. It has to be the right people. The more people you have, the longer it's going to take. But they got to be people that can actually be successful. When I be successful, they're given the authority and the empowerment to be able to pull it off. If you haven't done any strategic planning in the past, or you find yourself struggling with it, make sure you use an experienced facilitator. That doesn't mean that you have to go outside the organization, but it does mean that you should really consider the skill set of the people that are on the team. It doesn't necessarily mean the person with the most power should be running the meeting, and that's a typical thing that happens with small companies. Is small companies are grown up by 1, 2, 3 people, and then after a while that person basically does everything or makes the charge for everything. So be careful about that. Just because they're great entrepreneur and great leadership skills doesn't mean that person's the best facilitator. They may be a good facilitator. So look across your senior management team if you have one of those, and sometimes it's best to pick an experienced facilitator just to help manage through this process. It's an important one. And if you haven't done it ever, don't recreate the wheel. There's no reason to do that. It's okay to get help from someone. If you got somebody you brought in maybe from the organization that has been through a process, use that person. Make sure that that person's been battle tested. At Premier, when we started this many years ago, we actually brought in a consultant, and that was good. There's a couple little caveats when it comes to consultants, because they're trying to appease a lot of different types of people, and as we all know, system integration isn't like the biggest fish in the sea. So that you get a lot of folks that are have wrote stuff and have done stuff with manufacturing organizations, things like that. Little geared different towards what we do as system integrators, but certainly going through that process with somebody that can facilitate that. And if you haven't done it, I certainly would encourage you to consider going outside the first time to help go through that process. And you may tune it a little bit after you're done, but you'll pick up a lot of different tips and tricks, and you may pick up some forms and some processes and checklists and all kinds of things that could help with that experience. Get out of the office. It's really just a matter of your time. It's a matter of your distractions. And if you're going through this with the right mindset, as we talked about earlier, you're trying to, these are strategic objectives. These are the things that is going to steer this company in the right direction. So it deserves the attention of that. And you would certainly not want to be distracted while you're doing that. Now, that doesn't mean you can get away for a week sometimes, but you may be able to get away for half a day here and there. It doesn't have to be to some exotic location. It could be down the road at the hotel's conference room or something like that if you need to, if you don't have a secluded space where you're not going to be constantly interrupted. And again, this is somewhat of relation to how many people are involved in your strategic planning process. And if you got a lot of people, you got a lot more opportunities for distractions. And then you got people disengaged, they leave, they come back, nobody's caught up, you waste time backtracking, trying to catch them up. Hopefully, some people are probably laughing right now, or at least smiling at that, or maybe even shaking their heads and doing the double face palm. I can't see those right now. But it's pretty important to make sure that you can isolate yourself as you're going through this process. It's that important. And if you don't think it's that important, then that may be something you need to look at as well. Clear your calendars. Get this out there. way in advance. If I try to schedule something next week, I'm going to be out of luck because I know those people are already going to be covered up. So you got to do this months in advance. You got to be doing this maybe even 6 to 8 months. Maybe you get into a routine. You always do it a certain time of year, but you got to clear out your calendar. You got to make sure that, hey, no, this is sacred time, and we're not going to interrupt this unless it's, you know, obviously super urgent. But get it off your calendar, or get this on your calendars and get everything else off. Another one, if you haven't done this yet, or have only done it once, you have to be accepted of. Just have to accept the fact that you're just not going to be efficient at it the first few times. You're going to, you know, you may have brought somebody in. They're going to take you through 15 steps, and maybe only 12 apply to you. So, you know, embrace that learning curve. Understand it for what it is. Take in as much as you can, and then you can go from there. So you're just not going to be efficient. So you need to allot extra time, is really what I'm telling you, to your strategic planning process. And then beware of the weed whackers. We get a lot of those. This goes back to good facilitation of meetings and things like that. Because when you're talking about strategic objectives and you got a room full of people, or even a handful of people, a lot of people get a lot of different ideas, and you can obviously go in the ditch real quick or start cutting the weeds down. And it's very easy to do because you're trying to think of a very high level, and sometimes a little bit too high, if you will. And you got to be able to contain those folks, and this goes back to facilitation of meetings. Don't do everything every year. This is something that we struggled with here for a little while. We're getting better at it year over year. We used to follow the steps religiously, and then we realized that, you know, okay, we understand what industry that we're working in mostly this year. Chances are that isn't going to change next year, and I don't need to reanalyze every little thing about that industry. And this is that external stuff that I was talking about earlier. You're basically looking at your market, and that's a good thing to do, but you may not need to do every market that you're in every year, unless something major is going on in that market, news or companies' closings or things like that. Then you revisit it. But you don't have to visit every little item of any particular process every year. And we did that for a while, and we go through it, and then it does affect the mood, I guess, the mental state, and that's so important in these meetings. But you know, once people get a little disenchanted, then, as you know, it starts kind of going to the wayside. So when it's time to talk about something really important, people are a little bit disengaged. So we want to try to avoid that. And so that's why I'm talking about this one a little bit. Is, you know, it's just, you can get a lot of steps to start. You may only do a third of them, a half of them every year, and then just rotate them in. You may look at a market every 3 to 5 years, for instance. You may have strategic objectives that are 2 to 3 years long, so you don't always have to come up with 3 every year or 4. It just depends on the resources available and the direction the company needs to head. And then don't try to do it all at once. You can't do it in a week. If you do it in a week, again, I would venture to guess that you're not being as effective as you want to be. You may be extremely efficient, but you may be just checking the box and getting through it. And that's one of the things that you got to be careful of. It's certainly one of the things that we struggle with. When we do this all year now. We focus on it over about a quarter. And again, that's just an example, but certainly spread it out over a few months, and do keep in mind that people just get tired. You can sit in the same meeting for 8 hours a day. Usually you start losing interest after 2 to 3 hours, so I would certainly recommend no more than a half a day when you got breaks and things like that in there that can help it. You know, so it's really 2 to 3 hours of content. Half a day is usually sufficient. If you get it, you know, and you plan it once a month, and sometimes that gets people to do a couple things or refine your strategy, and then by the time, you know, that quarter's over, or that 4 months, or whatever it takes you, you will have a good, solid, strong objective that again is smart and can be achieved over the year. So with that, I'll leave you with another quote. This is something. This one's a little personal for me. In fact, it was in a little book my wife gave me years ago. I think it was for Father's Day, actually. And I was in between my MBA and going back to school, considering going back to school again, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go through that again. And then she handed me this little book and had this little quote in there, and I was like, yep, this is right, and I think it applies, and I've never forgotten it, and it applies to a lot of things in our life. So I would hope that, you know, when you look up a year from now, you're not sitting there going, man, I wish we would have done that. We'd be further ahead than we are today. So I would challenge you to take an active role at this, and it's not something to be done passively. With that, this is just a reference sheet. It should be included in your presentation. Number 2, go back there, sorry. Number 2, the Bradford, that's the little book that we started with, and then we brought a consultant in, the guy, I guess one of these guys that actually wrote it, and then we went through that one. So this, again, just one. There's plenty of them out there, and certainly some other research if that's your sort of thing. So with that, I'd like to thank you for attending. If you got any questions or anything of that nature, I'd be glad to do that. Monica, Jose, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions coming in. For those that are still on the line, keep in mind there is a Q&A box. And this is where you are to put the questions if you have any.
I did get a question coming in for chat. If there will be a copy of this presentation available afterwards?
The question is, we always make our webinars available. It is through our Connected Communities website, and you can also go and review other webinars that were given in the past. So I think that we may want to close this. We're losing some participants. So let me close this, please. To all the attendees, thank you very much for your participation. My hope is that you have several takeaways that will help you get a few steps closer to operational excellence. Tony, thank you very much for the contribution of your time and expertise. Your presentation was very insightful. We wish you the best, and also to Premier System Integrators. Keep up the good work. Thanks again to our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. Be sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. As you know, this will be launched automatically 30 seconds after we complete the session. Your feedback is important to us, and it helps us with our continuous improvement. In closing, I have 3 important things to share. One is that for our 2016 conference presentations, they are available on the Connected Community Library. It is the same site that I mentioned for previous webinars. And then please check out the June newsletter that was sent out last week. There are a lot of pictures and material from the conference. You will have some good time reviewing what we did at the conference. And 3, to those that attended the conference and got to witness the momentum behind the Pulse Statistics program by CSIA, you may want to check this out. You know, I strongly encourage you to do so. Benchmarking is just as important as implementing best practices and our certification efforts. So in closing,
before
go
we
ahead,
close,
Monica, please.
Yes, I got a question. We have a person who called in and asked if he can ask a question before we close.
Sure.
Let's see if he's still on here or he logged off. I'll try to I'm sorry for interrupting. I think he hanged off. He is not with us anymore. Sorry about that.
No problem. So there is a question that I can see now. Tony, can you see it? Has there been any new date set for the release of a new best practices manual? So we're still trying to get this out by the end of the year. You all know that when we're working with volunteers, you know, especially for something as big as the review of a best practices manual, you know, we have some some challenges to meet our deadlines. So not coping away. I'm just letting you know that there's a lot of work going on, and also a lot of work in addition to the volunteering work. So a little bit of patience. We will keep you all updated on the progress of the best practices manual revision 5. So let me close this one. Thank you very much. This is Jose Rivera, CSIA CEO. Thanks again for attending, and goodbye.